where were you, Sal, when you met Frank Lucas? What was he like? What was the environment like?
Well, if he got busted in early 75, I didn't get to meet him until the spring of 75, maybe April, May, June, like that. And we were in the federal house of detention, the old federal house of detention on West Street in Manhattan. And I noticed that he was playing pinochle. And if I remember right, he actually played partners with Jimmy Burke, because I was partnered with Dave Icovetti. In those days, you played pinochle, and if you won, you stayed at the table. And if you lost, another couple would come on. And I noticed Lucas, who was a pretty good pinochle player, he was actually playing with the best card player you could ever want to meet, because that's what Jimmy Burke. And when I played across from him, I stood up and shook hands because we lost. And I remember him gripping my hand. He had this strong grip. And when I looked at his hands, they were huge. His fingers were twice the size of any normal man's fingers. He was kind of a funny guy. He was outgoing, and all the mob guys liked him. That's what I remember about him.
Welcome back to a lifetime of Mafia Tales. Today, Sal and I discuss drug lord Frank Lucas. Frank worked his way up to the very top in the drug game. Then he ended up landing himself in prison. Sal speaks on what their encounters were like and how Frank Lucas really was as a person. During this episode, we go into detail from the beginning of Frank's life up until the end. There's a book and movie about Frank Lucas named American Gangster. Really great movie, great book, I highly recommend them. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel for more videos like this. Also, please subscribe to our Patreon channel for an exclusive story about Frank Lucas. That link can be found in the video description. And without further ado, let's get into this episode. Alright, welcome back to another episode. Today we got a very interesting character we're going to be covering, Frank Lucas, who was a drug kingpin in Harlem, very well known throughout New York, and he had multiple people working for him underneath him, but at the beginning he had to work his way up to the top because he came from nothing. And Frank Lucas, this is who we're going to be talking about today. Sal got to meet him while he was in a holding facility, and so we're going to talk about what led up to Frank Lucas going to this holding facility in 1975 and what it was like when Sal met him and some other characters. So Sal, what I suppose you want me to kind of cover his early life because you don't really know too much about Frank.
No, I didn't know anything about the guy. I actually knew nothing about him when I met him. And after I got out of jail, I was out of jail late, I should say in the fall of 75. Yeah, I heard rumors about him. That was it. But I could see that the mob guys, the Italians, they liked him or they respected him. He had a reputation.
Oh, I would imagine so. Anybody on that East Coast area probably had to deal with him or someone dealing on his street levels and stuff, just any kinds. I mean, he was high up there eventually, but it all came down, which we'll cover that as well. So his early life, I believe at 6 years old, he witnessed his first racism act. Like some white guys came up to his house and they were calling his cousin racist names, and they brought him out and outside the house, and they ended up killing him. He was only a 13-year-old kid, and they said that the white guy said that he was staring at some white girl, and they didn't like that. So Frank witnessed this whole thing, and so at an early age, he was already witnessing sick stuff like that. And even like the sheriff showed up at his house one day, and Frank's father shot this sheriff, I think, right in the ass, and then his father went on the run. So just being at that age, just so young, being able to see all this coming from that era and that time and that race division, like it was just pretty sick. I'm just trying to lay out a background here, Sal.
And that was in the 1930s because he was born in 1930.
So he was a little older than you by maybe 20 so years.
15 years, yeah.
15, yeah. Well, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just thinking, I think he lived in the Carolinas. He was down in North Carolina or something.
Yeah, he was, in that area for a little while, but then he ended up getting involved with, I suppose he went on his own around 6 years old, and he started getting involved with crime, and it said that he would steal chickens and livestock just to survive and eat and make his own ends meet because his family wasn't providing for him. And so that was like his early little crimes that he was doing, and it would eventually, of course, go up to like robbing people and robbing places. And he got involved with just gambling and all kinds of stuff at a very young age. And So eventually he did get arrested, and he claimed he didn't do whatever crime it was. So this just really changed his whole mindset because he was convicted of being guilty. So I'm sure at that point he's like, well, if I'm gonna be guilty for this, I didn't even do it. So I'm gonna go on and try and, if I'm gonna go down, I want to go down for something I did, kind of thing. I don't know if you ever experienced anything like that, Sal, like being
No,
guilty.
not really. I was always guilty.
Yeah, well, apparently in Frank's book, that's what he said his situation was. So,
Yeah.
but when he got locked up, like this was like some kind of weird old time kind of thing. Like it was a work program. So he met some old timers and different kinds of people that were there. And while they were out there working, and if they had to go to the bathroom, they had to like tie this rope around them, and then like they would go around the corner or something. And so he would have to yell like, "Hey, I'm here still," like every 10 seconds or whatever it was to the guard. And so this is when he plotted his escape because some old timer told him, he said, "Hey, you need to get out of here, or if not, you're going to be here forever." So Frank's like, "Well, I better get out of here." So he formed this plan. So he's told the guard, "Hey, I got to take a shit." So he went to the, around the corner, whatever he did. And he just said, "Hey, I'm here. I'm here." And then eventually he just, boom, he just jetted it and took it. And he just kept saying, "Hey, I'm here. I'm here," but so the guard must not have noticed right away, but he ended up getting away. And then some family just passing by, they ended up taking him in, and they took him to like, where did they take him? Like a cross country trip. And this was Frank, he was broke, he was alone, but I think they ended up taking him to almost to Harlem, but he ended up coming across a woman apparently too named Mrs. Jones, and she was like this older woman, and she was, having a fair relationship with him, and she was kind of taking care of him, but he eventually left her, and that's when he started getting more deeper in crime and went off to Harlem, I believe. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, he immediately um, became associated with this Bumpy Johnson guy who was, born around the turn of the century. So that guy was about 30 years older than Lucas. But that guy
Mhm.
had all kinds of, illegal businesses going on in Harlem. And I think he started teaching them, the way around crime. And whatever they were doing, they did. And I think somehow Lucas figured out that he wanted to be in the drug business.
And that's true because I remember reading as well. Just recently, I read a book and it told me, I suppose it said that Frank Lucas was heavy into the drugs and everything, but I don't know so much Bumpy Johnson was very involved with that because in the book it really said that Frank was dealing drugs behind Bumpy's back. So
Right. Yeah.
when
I
he
don't think that, from what I read, I don't think Bumpy Johnson wanted anything to do with the drug business. He had gambling, he had numbers. And back in those days, the mob was deeply entrenched and involved in numbers. And I think there was this guy, Dutch Schultz, who gave all the Holland people, you know, the scare of their life because he was killing people on a regular basis. So I believe they had to fight off the police department and Dutch Schultz.
Oh, you bring up a good point. I read another book recently by Louis Ferrante. He just wrote a book called Brigada. I just interviewed him Sunday, and in his book he talks about this one section of the book, like Bumpy Johnson partnering up with Lucky Luciano after Dud Schultz was killed
Right.
because of the fact that he wasn't allowing them to do business in that Harlem area. So once, and then, Lucky's like, "Don't worry, I'll get back with you soon" to Bumpy. And then sure enough, after Doug Schultz was killed, Bumpy Johnson connected with Lucky, and they started doing business.
Yeah, they showed all of those interactions in the movie Hoodlum. I don't know if you ever saw that movie Hoodlum. That
Oh,
was
I haven't.
terrific movie, and you get a chance, you should see that. And most of the stuff in there was pretty accurate, where Lucky Luciano actually met with Bumpy Johnson.
Yeah, I mean that's true. Like Lucky's thinking was just forward thinking. Like he was dealing with everybody and from every races and stuff. Like he wasn't just dealing with the Italians. He had a new
Right.
mindset, and he's just working with everyone. So Bumpy Johnson was one of them. That was Frank Lucas's. That was his mentor. So that was uh, that was just the beginning for Frank, though. Like I said, he just as soon as he got to Harlem, he started robbing number guys and drug dealers and
Right.
all, any way he could make some money. But
Right.
that is eventually how he got involved with the drug business. Like it says that Frank's cousin showed him how to cut heroin, and Frank, after he realized, hey, I can make triple of the money he spent off of just buying the drugs,
Right.
he kept selling and selling, and he would sell out quick, and so he'd start living good, I suppose you could say. Him he bought an apartment, clothes, getting women, cars, everything he could think of.
But that
And
was after Bumpy Johnson died. See,
yeah.
Bumpy Johnson only lived to 62 years old, so he died in the mid 60s, and that's when Lucas went full blown into the drug business.
Mhm. And that's
Yeah.
in the movie, it was portrayed too that Frank Lucas, like Bumpy Johnson, died in the store. It looked like he had a heart attack or something, and Frank Lucas was holding him and stuff,
Yeah.
which may be true. I haven't I looked into that whole death of him, but yeah, you're right. He didn't live to be super old, but after that, that's when Frank he hit the streets like that, and he started making millions just by flipping his heroin, and he
Right.
would and then he would eventually go on to doing that, going to outside the country to straight to the source and stuff like that to really be able to get a good connect. Do you know
Right.
much about that?
Well, no, I didn't know anything about his connections, but there was a lot of rumors that he went to, he went to Asia, he went to the Far East, and that's where he made his contacts to get the pure heroin out there. And again, with the level of dealers that he probably had in Harlem, I mean, these guys, from what I heard from like Fat Gigi, they would have, if they had a black guy, he would bring them shopping bags full of money every 2 3 days. So you can imagine how much money that was, and that was in the 70s. That's like amazing amount of money in the 70s.
Oh yeah. Well, before Frank like blew up like that, I suppose, and when he first went to prison, and so the way that I kind of connected it was he ended up. This is where I believe you may have came across to him in 1975, and so from what I could research and read online was that Frank Lucas he went to well, you met him in the holding facility, but he would later go on to go to prison. But in
Right.
1975, his house was raided in New Jersey, and there was they found drugs, and then the authorities also found $584,000. And Frank claimed that they didn't even report all the money that was
Right.
actually there at the house. But
Right.
either way, he ended up going to prison for this. And
Yeah.
this is where you came across him. And so, where were you, Sal, when you met Frank Lucas? What was he like? What was the environment like? Who were some of the guys that were around?
Well, if he got busted in early 75, I didn't get to meet him until the spring of 75, maybe April, May, June, like that. And we were in the federal house of detention, the old federal house of detention on West Street in Manhattan. And I noticed that he was playing pinochle. And if I remember right, he actually played partners with Jimmy Burke, because I was a partner with Dave Icavetti. In those days, you played pinochle, and if you won, you stayed at the table. And if you lost, another couple would come on. Another two guys would come on. And I noticed Lucas, who was a pretty good pinochle player, he was actually playing with the best card player you could ever want to meet, because that's what Jimmy Burke was, an amazing card player. He had a great mind, a great memory. And when I played across from him, I stood up and shook hands because we lost. And I remember him gripping my hand. He had this strong grip, but when I looked at his hands, they were huge. His fingers were twice the size of any normal man's fingers, and he had a big gregarious laugh. He was kind of a funny guy. He was outgoing, and all the mob guys liked him. That's what I remember about him.
Any conversations you remember, like just saying hello to him, or what was the?
I remember him talking about a breeding bull that he bought.
Okay, what was
Like
that
he
about?
paid a couple of $100,000 because he had a farm down in North Carolina. And I heard that he paid, or he talked about this $400,000 breeding bull that he had down in North Carolina. So he did live an extravagant life. I think he got connected with Jimmy Burke because Jimmy had Jimmy had the hold on the guards that would slip in stuff in the prison.
Yeah.
And, that was Jimmy's specialty, bribing officials.
Yeah, well, so like with him, he was well respected within that prison or the holding facility, I suppose, and he just really was able to connect with everybody and have a.
Right.
There was no beefs, nothing like that that you've
No,
seen him
no,
arguing or get mad or anything,
no. He was well respected. Everybody knew who he was.
including
Even
the guards.
Yeah, everybody knew who he was. Yeah, I mean, in those days, there was probably, some dealers that were there from Harlem, and they probably told the hacks, the guards, "Hey, this guy's big time," and everybody knew. They knew who he was, and that's just because he stuck out. There was very few black guys, in that particular holding, that floor that we were on. Most of the Italian guys were on that floor.
Well, either way, he was able to get along with everybody, and
Yeah.
well, what was this holding facility like?
Oh, it was like the turn of the century detention center. It was the Federal House of Detention in Manhattan. Had no air conditioning. They had just put phones in there where you could call somebody. You had to reverse the charges, call collect, and there was always something going on. Of course, the Italian guys ran the control of the phones. Because you'd have to stand online to get a phone call.
Oh, well, so how long were you in this facility? Just a couple months?
I got there around February, March, and then in July, they closed that facility down, and they opened a new holding facility, another house of detention, down in the village, the lower part of Manhattan. It was located on Park Row, and it was a high tech prison that had no bars, and it had electronic doors and cameras. And we were moved in. It was called. It was located on Park Row, right down in the Little Italy Chinese Chinatown area. So that's where they moved us. But I didn't see Lucas anymore after that.
No,
I
that
was
was
on the seventh floor with Jimmy Burke. Tommy DeSimone came in. Dave Icavetti was there. So mostly Italians on that floor in the new house of detention. And I didn't see Lucas anymore. I didn't even follow him. I mean, it was, second thought. A few months later, I had gotten out, and I never did go up to Harlem to deal drugs. Cataldo had the connection, so I didn't have to go anywhere to get my
right.
drugs.
I believe one time you mentioned to me too that Frank Lucas said he predicted his attorney's death.
Oh yeah, he had this attorney. That's right. He told the story. The guy's name was Gino Galena, and he was a big time defense attorney, and he always bragged about how many cases he can fix. I think Lucas gave him $1 million, and then somehow he said the $1 million disappeared. And in '75, Lucas talked about he was going to get his. I followed his name, Gino Galena, and some years later, I don't know if it was 3 or 4 or 5 years later, they found him shot to death in the middle of the night in Manhattan. And some of the dirt started coming out that attorney worked both sides. He was working with the government and working with the mob and drug dealers. So Lucas knew that he was going to get killed.
So you think Frank Lucas may have been behind that?
Well, he gave the guy $1 million. He probably was. He probably had somebody kill him.
I mean, even maybe too, the guy could have been robbing other people's cases or just not going through on the fixing.
The guy was a low class, shyster. He was an attorney, but he was low class, and he thought he could get away with everything, playing both sides, But they found him shot to death. Nobody ever was arrested for his murder, and the story just disappeared.
Wow. What did you think when you read that in the newspaper?
I figured Lucas knew he was going to get killed. Maybe he had somebody kill him. I mean, in those days, Lucas probably had 100 different men that would do anything for him. He had a huge
Probably.
army. Lucas had a huge army in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, I suppose after that, he ended up getting released from prison, and this is when he ended up getting going pretty much harder with the drug business, and he ended up going to Bangkok, and he got his new supplier, and he went straight. He wanted to go straight to the source. He was tired of dealing with middlemen,
Right.
so he ended up going there, and they figured out a way to get government officials maybe involved that were army people or such is what they have said, that were able to help him smuggle it into the United States and get it
Right.
to him and where he needed to, and to where his guys could pick it up at the landing strip or wherever they went. But it was a long trip for him, and to go through and go all the way to Bangkok and just try to find some kind of plug, because I don't think he really went there knowing anything besides the source was there, but he just needed to find it. He didn't have no guy in, so he had to work his way up, and of course he ended up getting it, and he went back and forth, and it went on for quite a number of years. So
You know, he was the first drug dealer to put a logo on heroin.
right, and what did he name it?
I don't know, something blue magic, black. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
I think it
Well,
was Blue Magic.
yeah, he was the first guy to put a stamp on his heroin, and everybody who went to Harlem knew it was Lucas's heroin.
You ever see that when
I
you're on
didn't
the
see
street?
it, but I heard about it.
Oh, so people were talking about it back in the day.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Damn, man.
yeah,
Well, that is yeah, and that's kind of how they were able to, the feds and stuff were able to narrow it down that it was coming from him or some kind
yeah.
of supplier. Someone was stamping their product and stuff, so they knew on the street whose it was. But yeah, I mean, did you follow much of where he went after prison, like at all,
No,
or
I never followed anything about him really. I mean,
besides the
until
movie?
about 15 years ago when the movie came out, you know, most of that movie was pretty accurate. The things he did, you know, because he was a bit of a wild man.
Oh
He
yeah,
thought of nothing was shooting somebody in broad daylight.
right. And his thoughts were that he didn't really feel bad about what he was doing as a drug dealer and selling to people. He said, I just made the product available. And
Right.
like he also said that there was a time though that he did feel guilty because he's seen a couple kids, local neighborhood kids, just strung out on drugs, and he knew that it probably came from him. And so he
Yeah.
started feeling like guilty about that. And he also felt guilty about killing his family's pet, and they were going to eat it or something. I think it was a cow or something. But that's when he really started to have this shift in his head to where he was wanting to maybe make a change or something along those lines, because he was never fully ready, because he went in and out of prison a couple times,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's hard. It's hard to break away from that life because if you don't have any other income, you got to rely on your criminal activities.
I don't know, you're speaking from firsthand, man. So like when you were involved with that, did you ever like think that when before you got busted?
No, you learn how to justify your activities in crime. You know, you tell yourself that your family needs money and that you don't have any other ways to make money and you're never going to have a job. You rebel against society. That's what you do.
So
And
you would,
you like being a criminal because the people under you look up to you. You like having pockets full of money. Really.
yeah. So you were able to do that for a number of years too. Just tell yourself that,
Oh
and
yeah, tell yourself that everything's good. You know, you're always paying off somebody, whether you're paying off cops, you're paying off your family. Yeah, you know, you got a bunch of guys. They're sort of like yes men. They're not very bright, and they work for you. Every time I had a business, I had 10, 15 guys working for me, and I'd meet more criminals. The more criminals you met, you know, and if you were in jail, like I said, I'm sure Lucas took advantage of his celebrity status in jail because, like I said before, going to jail, people think they call it the Department of Corrections. and I always called it the Department of Connections.
That would be correct, huh?
Yeah, yeah,
That's a better way to say it.
yeah,
Well, he did have cops on the payroll, and he was approached a couple times by a couple cops to just they were just really extorting him, and
yeah,
he had to pay because they would keep the feds off of him, is what they were saying they were going to do. But then they kept
yeah.
coming back, and they wanted more and more and more.
Right.
And eventually, he told him, he's like, you know what, it'd be a good day to die right now. That's what he was.
Yeah,
And then they took off and kind of left him alone after that.
yeah,
But
yeah, well, yeah. Everybody knew in Harlem that he was the killer. They stayed away from him.
well, and that's another thing too that I seen like from the book and but the book he really didn't talk about a whole lot of murders, but then you go and watch the movie, there
Yeah,
was like two murders in there for sure, and I'm just like thinking to myself like I don't think maybe he did tell the feds he did that. I don't know because in the movie he also portrayed himself when he flipped, he only gave up the cops and no other street dealers.
yeah,
So I don't know if that were to be true because in the movie there was a man that was being tortured and then they ended up killing him. And then in the movie as well, there was a guy that wanted 20% of his money, and so Frank, in the movie, went and shot the guy in broad daylight in front of everyone.
yeah.
So whether that's true or not, I don't know. You know how movies
Well,
are
there
now.
was several movies done about Harlem, black gangsters, and drugs. And actually, the one I liked the most was the movie called Hoodlum, where they portrayed the life of Bumpy Johnson, and they gave all the details of what the Bumpy Johnson character did and how they ran the numbers business. And there was really no mention of drugs in the Hoodlum movie. It was all about numbers and murders and how they were fighting for their space because the Dutch Schultz character, he was causing all kinds of havoc up there. And eventually that uh, Charlie Luciano got involved. And I liked the movie Hoodlum. So if you get a chance, you should see that one.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I'll have to see if I can find it. And
Yeah, that's a good movie.
yeah, I always like ones like that. And another interesting thing about Frank, because you brought up numbers, and so Frank, he hit it big one time, and he won over 500,000, and he put it in the trunk of his car and just forgot about it for months. He said,
Wow, that's a lot of money in those days. I
and
mean,
he put it away,
yeah,
forgot about
that
it.
was like Gotti. Gotti won like $500,000 once. He hit
Really?
a number. Yeah, you got to
Yeah,
bet $1,000 to get 500,000 if you hit. So imagine betting 1,000 a day every day on a number.
that's probably what he was doing, right?
Yeah, really.
Well, Frank ended up starting to be investigated by the feds again, and then they were able to. I suppose they were watching his house, and they would eventually come in, and then they would search it. And he had a nice house. I remember looking it up and stuff, and he had I believe, his whole family there.
Yeah,
And then he would, when he was pulling up to the house or what would not, like he was kind of hesitant because he was worried about the feds, But they eventually came in and they did bust him
yeah,
after that, and they tried flushing all the stuff and getting rid of it. And I think the wife ended up getting 5 years for obstruction of justice for throwing money out the window,
right.
and then Frank was sentenced to 40 years in prison for this. So
Wow. Yeah,
I don't even think that was the end of it, man, because he ended up getting out and he got busted. He got another 7 more years.
yeah. He didn't learn his lesson. He kept getting out and going right back to drugs.
He did, and
Yeah,
then Frank was approached to cooperate with the government to help them put away the cops, like the corruption of the cops. So he did just that, kind of like you did with the whole judge thing.
yeah, yeah. There's got to be an end to it. Otherwise, I mean, he continued his whole life in crime, really, until he got older.
Oh, here we go, right here. I believe he was 50 years old when he got out of prison after that 7 year bid. He started selling drugs again when he was living with his mother. And then, let's see, he ended up getting set up again and he only got 6 months in prison. And so after that part, he was ready to make a change, and they made a movie about his life, and he talked about regretting everyone he hurted, and that was kind of the end. But it took maybe quite a few times in prison to
Yeah.
really make that change.
His whole life he was involved in crime. I mean, I broke away from crime 40 years ago this year and
Yeah.
never went back to it. I don't know if many people have done that. I mean, I didn't ever expect to be talking about it, but here we are talking about it, for the last year. So you got to get away from it, because once you get away from the life of crime, then you start realizing the value of things, because everything came so easy. There was no value. If I had 2 or 3 cars and a half a dozen exotic watches, you just kept getting more of it. And then one day it was all gone, and I didn't pay much attention to having a desire to get the fancy schmancy stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he lived that same way, Lucas.
Well, and I'm supposed he had that change because they approached him about making a movie and a book. Of course,
Right,
a lot
right.
of us have seen it. If you follow gangster movies, American Gangster was the name of this his story, I suppose, and it was good. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I remember seeing it as a kid. Again, my dad put me on that stuff, Sal.
Yeah,
But it was good. I enjoyed it, and he I don't know. I suppose he had some kind of remorse towards the end.
yeah.
And
Everybody gets a little remorse, except for maybe Gas Pipe Castle. He didn't have any remorse.
yeah,
Or Scarper didn't have any remorse, really.
that is. What would you say the message is from Frank Lucas's story?
Well, just look at the results at the end. You could say crime doesn't pay. People would say, oh, crime pays. Not so. His whole life was a turmoil. He lived a miserable life. He probably died, in pain, in anguish, whatever. And the message is that you've got to get into reality. Crime isn't the way to go. So, I mean, I've been talking about that for 35, 40 years now.
I would definitely agree with you. From what I could see and what I could take
Yeah.
away with Frank Lucas, like his story is just, yeah, he was poor. He came up. He started selling drugs. He made it to the top in that kind of industry, but that wasn't the one that he should have got involved with. Just think about all the people that he hurt or
Yeah.
got hurt on the way up there, just over business or just
Yeah.
over overdosing or whatever the case may have been. But he made it big, and he had a couple of chances when he got out of prison to really change his life around. But it took till just about the end of his life to where he was able to make that change and want to
Yeah.
tell his story and feeling guilt and remorse and stuff like that, because that'll eat you up, man. You think about that every day,
Yeah.
the guilt
Yeah.
and stuff that you would have
Yeah.
done back in with all the things, especially him, what he could have been involved with. He was running a crew of guys. Who knows what those guys did? And
Yeah.
for the honor of Frank Lucas, you
Yeah.
know, that was. But he made the change, and he got out of that life before he died, which at least he didn't die in that life, and he saw some sort of light, But
Yeah. I think his daughter started an organization to help, underprivileged, or help, you know, black guys, young guys coming up who had no education. So I think if you look it up, there was some type of a program that his daughter initiated.
no, that's good. That's great because that's exactly what he would have needed growing up, and she probably saw that as well and understood that. So
Right.
that's good. That's a smart thing that she did. That's good because that, like I said, he grew up poor. He didn't have much family support at all, so he went and he did it his own way.
Right.
So it
Yeah.
always starts with the family and how if they're lacking and helping or taking care of
Yeah.
the child, and then it goes on
You
and
know,
on.
I often wonder, after the movie came out, it came out about 15 years ago, how did the poor, young black guys in neighborhoods, how did they look at that movie? Did they look at it and think that Lucas was a hero, that Lucas was successful, or did that actually deter them from entering a life of crime? It'd be interesting to read about what young black, guys thought of the crime and the Lucas period in Harlem.
Well, I think that's across the whole board too, like with other mob guys and their movies getting made about them. other
Right.
gangsters and stuff. I would like to see, because the hopes of what we do with our show is that it
Yeah.
would detour them, but because that's why we really at the end really try to make it about, hey, this was a dead end for this guy. Look where it
Right.
ended up. Yeah, he may have lived nice and large, but there was so much pain and such going on during that
Right.
time that isn't spoken
Yeah.
about.
I
So
almost think all that crime money was cursed.
exactly.
Thinking back now, 30, 40, 50 years ago, I think it was cursed money. That's
Yeah,
just my opinion.
comes with a lot of issues, man. But
Yeah.
any other topics to wrap up before we go over to Patreon, Sal, and talk
No,
about it?
not
Lucas a
really.
little bit. Okay.
Anybody could read about his life. It's not glamorous. It was nothing, wonderful about the life that Frank Lucas lived.
Well, and we'll put his book in the video description too, so you guys
Yeah.
can check it out. And of course, you can look up online American Gangster, and you can rent the
Yeah.
movie as well if you just want to rent a movie. But we'll put, I'll for sure put the book in there. But now we're gonna go over to Patreon, everyone. So if you are not a Patreon subscriber, all you got to do is just go to the video description and sign up. And we're gonna go over there and we're gonna talk about an exclusive story about Frank Lucas. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in today. And if you haven't seen our other shows, all you got to do is just go to our homepage and go to the playlist tab and go to a lifetime of Mafia Tales, and you can see all of our other podcasts we've done in the past. You can even see our live shows on there too. So just check them out. We got a lot of good episodes on there. And that's why we got the playlist, because some of those videos can get buried from all of our other videos, all the new ones and stuff. So check that playlist out. And thank you, everyone. Frank Lucas sold a lot of drugs. They made a whole book and movie about his life. Please check it out if you haven't. The book link is in the video description. This is just another example of why crime doesn't end well. Do yourself a favor and stay away from it. Our hope is that you help any of your loved ones that may be at risk for getting involved in the criminal life. With these stories, you can bring up a very valid points to them why it's a dead end. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. Also, please be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel for more videos from Sal and myself. And if you want to get exclusive content from Sal and me that we don't post on YouTube, you can click the link in the video description to our Patreon account and sign up for our Patreon account. On that Patreon account today, we're going to follow up on this Frank Lucas episode. If you enjoyed this podcast that I do with Sal, I know you'll enjoy my podcast called the Invest in Yourself podcast. You can access that podcast by looking it up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even on YouTube by clicking this channel icon. All you got to do is just go to the playlist tab and click the Invest in Yourself podcast. I interview ex-gangsters, ex-mobsters, former addicts, all kinds of different people, so please check it out. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one. If you would like to support our podcast, we got a few items that you can purchase. All of these items can be found in the video description below. The first one is Sal's book, The Sinatra Club. You can get this personally autographed by Sal. The next one in our hottest seller is the 1972 Sinatra Club playing cards. Back in Sal's Mafia days, he opened up his own social club named the Sinatra Club. Many mobsters would come to this club, even when there were all-out wars going on between different families. They would come to the Sinatra Club and play cards. Some of the mobsters that played with these cards were John Gotti, Dominic Cataldo, Tommy DeSimone, Foxy, Jimmy Burke, Willie Boy Johnson, Tony Roach, Henry Hill, Joe DeFede, Danny Fatico, Gene Gotti, Peter Gotti, Joey Scopo, and many more. We're selling each one of these cards for $10 a piece. These cards are limited, we only got 1,000 of them. The next item is an autographed picture of Sal from his Mafia days. Another item is the Dinner with the Mobster card. You can get this autographed as well. This was an event that Sal had hosted in the past. We also got the Ubot's production ticket from an event that Sal had hosted. This is also autographed. The last item we got to offer is Sal's book, The Sins of the Father. Again, you can find all these items in the video description below.